Welcome to the Radix Review. Tune in each week as co-hosts Jay.Denton and Chris Nebenzahl cover the key trends in the apartment industry, macroeconomy, and much more. Hello, everyone. Today is June 19th. It is NAA's Apartmentalize week, the biggest event for NAA, the biggest event perhaps in the multifamily industry. Jay, you are in the city of brotherly love. You are there in Philadelphia on the ground in the action. What are you seeing? Who are you meeting with? What's the vibe in and around NAA right now?
Well, I see a lot of apartment people here. I will tell you the plane rides, whether it was the one I took or my colleagues or even friends of mine that were on different planes, they said the entire plane to Philadelphia was for NAA. So lots of industry folks here. This is, as you mentioned, massive conference. We go to a lot of different types of conferences. Some are more technology focused. Some are, let's say, deal making focused. This is really on an ops focused type conference. So a lot of people in operations, but we also have, the meetings I've been in, asset management, some construction. You'll have some revenue management and others, but it tends to be a bit more operations focused. We're right here in the middle of downtown in the convention center. It's huge. And I'll tell you that one of the things I like about this, and I think our wild card for this week will be some of our favorite conference cities to go to. One thing that I like about this, when you have this massive conference center in the middle, surrounded by hotels, places to eat, but then historic sites. And so people getting up to run to the Rocky statue or going to the Liberty Bell and others. It's a pretty interesting, unique type place to host a conference, but glad to be here.
Absolutely. I love Philadelphia. Tell me what the format of the conference is. Is it a lot of sessions, a lot of education? You mentioned some meetings that you're in with clients and with some other people in the industry. What's the feeling of the conference right now?
Yeah, if I could somehow walk through the wall behind me, the convention center is just right on the other side of the street. And so it's a really big facility. There's a massive expo hall that will have all sorts of different services and technology for the industry. I haven't been over there yet. In fact, I don't think it's quite open. So I'll be spending time there tomorrow. There's a big, lunch event where a lot of people are going to be touring all the different services. And so I'm looking forward to seeing all those again, connecting with people and other providers that are out there. A lot of education sessions. I know that people like us as well. So for Radix, we have, a lot of in-person client meetings in this boardroom that I'm in right now, just talking about what's happening in the market and some more granular, things that we're seeing. I'm sure we'll talk about that here in a second. We have a booth, so we're meeting people at the conference at our booth, discussing the market overall, where Radix fits into it, and how we help them. There's a big conference reception where there'll be a lot of networking. I can't imagine how many people are going to be there. I mean, thousands. And then we have an offsite reception a little bit later that I think will have a pretty terrific turnout. We're probably overbooked for it, lots and lots of people, but looking forward to connecting with them. And then we also, I guess finally here on the Radix side, have dinner set up to where you can have a little deeper conversations with folks in the industry.
That's awesome. It sounds like a great event. I know in past NAAs that I've been to, they've always had this maintenance mania as well, where I think maintenance technicians compete to see how fast they can fix things and build things. And as you mentioned, it's a very operations heavy on the maintenance side, heavy on the on-site team. And so it's a really interesting opportunity from what I've seen in the past to meet with perhaps the base users of Radix, the folks who are in our platform on an everyday basis, which is different, as you mentioned, than perhaps the NMHC conferences or some of the tech conferences. So great event. And for anyone who's listening tomorrow, if you have time, please stop by the booth, go see Jay, go see Blerim, go see some of the other Radix team members. We would love to chat with you. So Jay, you mentioned some of the client meetings that you're having. What's your focus? What are you trying? What's the message that you're trying to share? What are clients asking about in a lot of these meetings?
Yeah, people are just trying to really still figure out where the market is today, because it depends what types of properties you have, where you have properties, and so on. So I'd say the overall structure, that we're working through is one, just an overall what's happening in the economic and labor market environment. Overall, as we've discussed on this podcast, the labor market's still fairly strong, but that doesn't always end up in strong multifamily performance. So we then look at supply, we look at individual markets, submarkets, asset classes. So we're getting a bit deeper. And what I really like about this type of format, when you have these one-on-one meetings, we can start to show some of the things that you and I have been looking at that aren't yet in the product, but we're starting to formulate and get it ready for that. So things like asset class trends. So the difference between whether you call them A, Bs, and Cs or some other sort of format, but just looking at different segments of the market and certain trends we see there. For instance, where new supply may be impacting or not. Different visualizations on submarket performance that I think resonate, really well when you're trying to distinguish certain areas of town from each other. Concessions, concessions, we're taking a deeper review on those and really focusing in on, how prevalent are concessions, when they actually get offered, what's the real value on the street that's getting offered, so we can, see where some larger concessions are more prevalent, and then our forecast. So not just where things are today. I mean, every week we're coming out with, where the market is in terms of occupancy and rent growth and traffic and so on. But what do we expect for the remainder of this year? And then as we get into 2025 and we start thinking about soon budget setting, those are some of the types of things that, that we're covering in these meetings.
That's great. That's great. And what has been the feedback thus far for some of the meetings? I know you're only into day one. You've got 2 more busy days ahead of you. But what has been some of the early feedback you've heard?
I think if you start at the top in terms of at least market performance, so we see what's happening nationally, and to some degree, what's happening nationally, is filtering out, and it's occurring like that in a lot of markets. But then you have ones on the edges. So the ones that are doing really, really well are the ones that are struggling a lot more. And it depends on the group that we're speaking with. Some of them are concentrated only in those extreme ends or maybe right in the middle. And so their perception of what's happening can be different from one meeting to the next. Then you'll have groups that are everywhere. They're East Coast, West Coast. They're in the central part of the U.S. When you get within the markets, they have all sorts of different, types of assets and locations of assets in different neighborhoods and submarkets. And so, really what I'm getting back is making sure when they come to a conference like this, that their team is in tune with what's happening in the space from a variety of angles. We're here from more of the performance side and benchmarking, how your assets are performing in various markets, but making sure teams are aligned, not just internally, but externally as well. So that these are mostly internal, I would say, teams, but when they go back and they're talking to their investors or they're talking to people, who they've raised funds with or so on, the last 4 years have been such a roller coaster ride up and down. They're trying to figure out where the market is today. And so to me, that's probably the biggest thing overall. When you then start to dig in, this is, I think people have been really interested in this. When you start to dig in by asset class, and I'll just simplify it and call it ABC. I think most people kind of get mainly what, how people might go about classifying that. It's really interesting in some markets that Class A is actually fairly stable and growing. I wouldn't say that's the majority of markets by any means, but it is happening in some places. On the other hand, what some folks might classify as Class C, which tend to be, I would just say, older properties with lower rents, if you just kind of generalize it, there are markets where Class C is doing very, very well. They tend to be in places where housing affordability is even harder. So in a San Francisco or a Boston, somewhere like that. And so being able to, especially for these groups that are in multiple locations across the U.S., really understand why properties are performing a certain way and how they compare to more like properties in the market. I think that's where we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. And you mentioned kind of where the market is now. I would be remiss if I didn't jump in and say, where is the market right now? Well, you and I have been talking for weeks about occupancy slowly inching back to 94%. Just last week, we saw our national occupancy rate reach that 94% level. So we know it's not a huge gain. We know it's not, a monumental shift in occupancy, but the fact that we got back to 94%, that's good news. It continues. And we've made this point on this podcast in our layout reports. It continues to show how strong demand is for multifamily. You're talking about pretty steady demand in certain markets, even for Class A. I know we looked at Denver earlier in the week. You mentioned Boston, San Francisco for Class C. Really rebounding in markets like Las Vegas and even in parts of Texas that have struggled. So, I gotta continue to harp on how strong the demand for housing is today. So, great point.
Yeah, it's interesting, not always in a good way, but in some ways, we're, as we discussed in our last podcast, we're getting to kind of that peak point of leasing season, and after this, things will start to slow as they naturally do, but because of seasonality. I think what's going to be challenging that we can at least highlight for these teams so they're better prepared as they go through this. The places that haven't really moved up, maybe they've hit a trough for now, and they're not necessarily declining month to month, but they haven't had that uptick, like that swing back towards you. You're starting to get some sort of momentum. So what's going to be challenging, and this is where we're highlighting it so they can think through and maybe how they operate best in this environment. For some of those tougher places, well, they're about to get an even slower season when we get into fall, into winter. And so to be able to proactively know that, even when, it's better and more fun to share great news, but in the places where you really need to know what's going on so you can better prepare for what might be a pretty choppy or tough back half of the year, those are some of the, I would say, where we've gotten feedback about, I'm really glad that we know this so that we can better prepare for that period.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And the value of real-time data really speaks to what you're talking about. In fact, Blerim, our CEO, is going to be on a panel this week at Apartmentalize with Ari Abramson over at CRC, with Kevin Huss, with Marcy Williams, talking specifically about that real-time data, the value of that real-time data. So to your point, we are absolutely kind of at the turning point in leasing season. By the time you get back, we'll be looking at 4th of July, not too far out. And after that, we'll be kind of into the third quarter when leasing activity, rents, occupancy typically plateau. So yeah, absolutely. I can't stress enough how important what you said, looking at that real-time data, looking at those leading indicators can be. So Jay, I know you love to kind of walk around cities, grab a cup of Starbucks and wander around. What are you seeing in Philadelphia? It's a market that we're still gaining more and more data on, but what do you see when you look around in Philly?
I haven't seen as much apartment construction right here, but I did take the first thing I did. My habit. So literally the first thing I did, I changed into some exercise clothes. I walked down to the Liberty Bell, walked by where Thomas Jefferson signed the Declaration, or where he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And so a lot of activity now, a lot of that's probably because of the conference. But Philadelphia, longer term, as I've studied it, has been a little bit slower growth. You don't have as strong necessarily of rent growth or necessarily an occupancy rate. So, but right now, this is the part of the country that tends to be doing a little bit better, sort of mid-Atlantic up in the Northeast, Midwest. Again, from the conversations that we've been having, people have been surprised to see some of these markets a little bit more towards the middle or even upper part of the rankings at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned those mid-Atlantic states, Virginia, DC, Virginia Beach, the Carolinas, North Carolina has been doing very, very well. So yeah, definitely excited to see kind of what Philly and even Baltimore is a market that has been outperforming as well of late. Awesome. So what other kind of takeaways from NAA thus far? I know oftentimes there are a lot of big booths, there are a lot of big giveaways. Any kind of wild and crazy floor prizes you've seen? Again, speaking of the expo hall, it can be quite the bonanza in there. Any big takeaways thus far?
Not yet. So that's literally what I'm doing right after this. Is the big, I think, opening reception is right after this. So in next week's podcast, I'll likely be able to report on not only the remaining meetings and just some of the themes that come out of them, but I'll be looking for some of those nice giveaways, see what swag is out there. I know at the Radix booth, we're giving away golf balls, and we have a whole golf theme this year. And so that's the Radix style. We'll see what some of the other ones have. But no, I would just say overall, people really enjoy this conference. Everybody I've bumped into, even though that they admit the market's pretty tough this year, people seem pretty excited to be here. And so that would, I think, be my main takeaway so far.
That's great. That's great. Well, we'll wrap up a little bit early this time. We'll let you get out to the Expo Center and let you get back to your meetings. So for our wild card, as you mentioned, we wanted to talk about host cities of conferences or apartment conferences. Jay, what's your favorite city to attend? And we won't say Philly because you're there and we love it. We both love that city. But outside of Philadelphia, what's your favorite place to go for a multifamily conference?
Yeah, good call out. I don't want to say anything bad about Philly, and I've had a good time since I've been here. But it does have, I would say, Philadelphia has a lot of what I look for when I go to a conference and I know that I'm going to have an interesting time, not just at the conference, but outside of it, which is one of the big draws of going to a conference. Lots of great food around here. It's very walkable. We've got historic monuments you can see and so on, and some other things probably around town. Those are some of the attributes that I look for. So I don't know that there's not like a correct answer. I would say cities that I go to that have some of those things that I really like. Chicago is one. I love going to Chicago, downtown Chicago. There's a lot to do there. Great food. I've taken my kids, at times when I go there. It's just it's fabulous in a lot of ways. I also like Austin, Texas. The other thing about both of them, so similar kind of traits there. They're also not very far flights for me, so that's why that's an extra sort of bonus for both of those locations. So two of my favorites are Austin and Chicago, but there are probably 4 or 5, 6 others that certainly would be at least honorable mention that I've enjoyed. But what about you? When you think about the places you've been, where would you put at the top?
Yeah, so you stayed kind of central, right in the middle of the country. I'm going to go coastal. I love San Diego. San Diego has a ton of great conferences, a ton of great venues as well. And the food scene in San Diego, I think, is fantastic. You've got Little Italy, Coronado Island is great. Never seems to be bad weather in San Diego, of course. So San Diego is one I love. And DC, Washington, DC is another one for many of the reasons you mentioned. It's got great venues, but also a walkable city, good history, the museums. I love kind of checking out what's going on in and around our nation's capital whenever we can get there. So, yeah, I love San Diego, love DC. Chicago's another one, as you mentioned. Chicago's a great city to visit for any reason, conferences or fun or for whatever reason brings you to the Windy City. But yeah, San Diego and DC are probably my 2 favorites for conferences.
Yeah, now I have to expand it to 4 because those are also 2 really good ones. And like I said, I could probably add some on top of that, but those are 2 excellent ones as well.
Wonderful. Well, Jay, enjoy the rest of your time at NAA. And I know you've got a jam-packed schedule. Good luck with the meetings. Enjoy Blerim's presentation. For anyone who's at NAA, go check out Blerim's talk on Friday with Marcy, with Ari, with Kevin, and go see Jay. Go see the Radix team at the booth. We'll be there all week, and would love to see you if you're interested in stopping by.